Very good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We are starting the webinar now. And my name is Varun Rawat and I'm representing Path Infotech and would be moderating this webinar. I would like to thank everyone for taking out time and joining us today for this webinar. Today, we will share insights on how you can move production workloads to AWS Cloud with confidence. Besides this, we'll also share some use cases related to the same. Next slide, please. So some housekeeping rules here. So all the audience lines have been muted just to avoid any background noises and distractions. We would love to hear your opinion and questions. Please feel free to ask questions during the webinar, and we'll answer those questions in our Q&A session. Besides this, we will be sharing, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording of this webinar post this session. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to the agenda of the webinar. So today we'll listen to AWS Cloud leader, speaking about the value proposition. Then we'll also have the conversation with the customer on their journey on embracing AWS Cloud for their production workloads. We will also talk about the factors driving progressive leaders like you to embrace cloud. We'll also talk about the 4 steps to cloud. Then we'll explore production workloads on cloud with case studies. And we'll talk about path offer, and then we'll have the Q&A session. So moving on to the speakers, we are delighted to have a set of great speakers today. So we have Mr. Krishnan Kannan from Amazon, who heads the cloud economics. Good to have you, Krishnan.
Thanks a lot. Delighted to be present.
Yeah. So we also have Mr. Amar, who is the CIO of Encompass Group Australia. Now we also have Mr. Vishal Agarwal, who is the Vice President, Infrastructure Support and Practice Head for Cloud Services at Path. Hi, Vishal.
Hi, Varun. Good to be here.
Sure. We also have Mr. Pankaj Ratra, who is the Director of Business Development at Path Infotech. Hi, Pankaj. Good to have you here.
Hi, Varun. Good to be here. Look forward to a great webinar today.
Sure. So now I will pass it to Mr. Krishnan, and so over to you, Krishnan. We'll love to hear your insights on today's webinar. So over to you, Krishnan.
Okay. Hope you're able to see my slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot once again joining on this great initiative by Path Infotech, bringing the thought leaders onto this call. So what I'm going to talk about in today's my portion of this webinar is how you can move your production workload on AWS and using the economics of cloud, right? Given the fact that many enterprises are already running their workloads on either on-premises infrastructure or on the co-location infrastructure, one of the important consideration for moving to the cloud happens to be, what is it going to be better than what I'm running? One, in terms of value or cost comparison, as well as in terms of what are the additional intangible benefits or business value that we call it in Amazon Web Services that you're going to get. A quick introduction. I've been with the AWS side of business for more than 6 years. And for initial 4.5 years, I was managing sales and customer relationship. For past 1.5 years, I've been driving this practice called cloud economics. What cloud economics in AWS is what we're going to see in next 20 minutes. So without getting too much about, the two sides of cloud economics. So the cloud economics practice in AWS is very evolving. The reason I say evolving is it's been present for more than 7-8 years, but we learn every day with our customers and how we can make it better. So the two sides which are clearly identified are, one, before the customer takes a journey to the cloud, which is is looking for total cost of ownership comparison as well as business value benefits that he might get. And post he migrates to the cloud, and when he starts operating, what are the optimization opportunities he can derive? And we have got a programmatic approach in AWS to drive down the cost of the customers. We have different approaches. We help customers lower the cost time and again, and how we do it is what we're going to talk in the next few minutes. But if you really ask me, cost savings should not be the only considerations to move to the cloud. There are greater tangible benefits or rather intangible benefits that one might get. Some of this business value can also be quantified. So what I'm saying from a benefit categories, it can be put into the 5 buckets, right? The bucket of business agility, operational resilience, cost avoidance, workforce productivity, and lastly, the operational cost. Now, what are these benefits now in terms of how customers should start identifying, or enterprises should start identifying and providing some metrics? So when it comes to business agility, it's basically reducing time to market. How enterprises can innovate faster, reduce time to the market, and how you can increase the operational agility. Like, for example, if you're expanding to a new market, either within the country or globally, how you can take the power of the cloud from a technology standpoint and operate and bring the agility and operate much more conveniently than setting up infrastructure, and how some of these aspects of adoption of technology can reduce cost and increase pace of experimentation. When it comes to operational resilience, we're talking about how reduced risk profile or cost of risk mitigation can help you making your infrastructure more operationally resilient. Example of this can be an automated DR or managing unplanned outages. Planned outages are much better to manage because when you're setting up a DR, when you're setting up a production workload to fail over, and you're doing it in a planned manner, it's okay, it's manageable. But what happens if the disaster strikes when you do not plan? The unplanned outages are something which really takes sheen out of the business, as well as it can impact the profitability. Regulatory and compliance needs. More and more production workloads can be regulatory in nature. How you can make sure you are compliant from a regulatory standpoint and from a security standpoint by moving to the cloud, which offers all this compliance and security much more efficiently than a lot of enterprises who can manage on their own, because it could involve cost, it could involve infrastructure setup, so on and so forth. In terms of workforce productivity, many organizations have started calculating the resource efficiencies in terms of how adopting cloud can help them automate many environments. The automation drives maintenance efficiencies, as well as how you can, by making sure that the existing resource focus on innovation rather than maintaining the existing infrastructure, leveraging DevOps, leveraging APIs, how you can improve the productivity, as well as the aspirational goals of a lot of individuals who want to move ahead, given the fact that we are in the era of AI, ML, as well as the new age digital technologies, how you are able to fulfill the aspirational needs of some of those resources and help them become more productive, and so that they can start thinking on innovation rather than maintaining the heavy or what we call it in Amazon is underlying undifferentiated heavy lifting. On the last two, on the cost avoidance, it's very important because what we have seen is when we are doing a lot of procurement on whether it's on the on-premises infrastructure or a co-location, the procurement team also goes through different cycles. They need to collect 3 quotations in most of the cases. In some cases it could be more. They need to manage the vendors, and they need to make sure they are able to maintain those infrastructure. Now, when organizations buy, they buy it for 5 years or a 7-year period. Now, in that era, as we are living in an era of ever-changing environment, some of those OEMs may also vanish between one cycle to another. Some of the OEMs can merge with another OEMs. How you're able to make sure you get what you have been committed in those period, as well as you don't become dependent on a particular infrastructure rather than leveraging the technology as such. On the operational cost, because the cost is very transparent, how you are able to manage the demand and supply aspect of which is required for a particular workload, and how you're able to the transparency is able to lead to a lean mindset in terms of cost, as well as how you're able to bring in efficiency in your infrastructure. So one of the companies, global companies, which has moved the entire infrastructure to AWS, including a lot of production workloads, was GE Oil and Gas. Right? And GE Oil and Gas did this study when they had moved 311 apps. Currently, they have moved more than 2,000 apps on AWS, and they had quantified some of those benefits. So if I pick up one benefit from each of the buckets, they said that by becoming more agile, they were able to deliver their applications 77% faster than what they were able to do before. In terms of operational resilience, their P1, P0 incident reduced by 98%. And the overall total cost of ownership savings that they saw by moving the production workload was to the tune of 52%. In terms of the resource efficiencies, by ensuring that they become more operationally resilient, the workforce became so productive that they started building a lot of innovative things like automated bots. They were able to build DevOps as a practice, as well as on the last bucket, if you see, they were able to decommission 50 applications which were not probably efficiently used. And they were also able to bring in huge savings on their overall cost of operation. So in terms of the business value, the 4 framework that we see, which is cost savings, staff productivity, operational resilience, and business agility, which we just spoke, the typical focus that we see in enterprises is on the cost. While cost is super important, and I don't deny it, but it's also important to see how some of the other business value can also be, we can start focusing on that, because those are the most compelling cloud benefits rather than the cost. Because cost, the basis of how you efficiently run, you can definitely bring down the cost. But are you going to be focusing on the business benefit that will help you to achieve competitive advantage, as well as helping your organization to move ahead in terms of innovation? After all, the IT and the infrastructure team was always created with the vision of that they were going to take the organization to the next level in terms of innovation. We also see some of the benefit categories, how it impacts different organizational hierarchy. Like, for example, the TCO and the resource efficiencies is mostly at the CIOs and CTO level. In terms of accelerating application deployment, it becomes a business owner's responsibility. And the last 3 are at the very senior level in terms of risk mitigation or a global expansion or an M&D and divestiture. So, but then we will restrict today's conversation only to TCO, which is the total cost of ownership. And how do we end up comparing, especially when you are going to move from on-premises environment or co-location to cloud? So what is TCO? Is basically comparative total cost of ownership analysis for running an infrastructure environment end to end. And you can do under these 3 scenarios in terms of whether you're comparing specific workload to move to cloud, or you're building a business case to move to cloud, as well as if you're already running on cloud, and if you want to compare that, if I move back today from on-premises or co-location back to, or rather from cloud to on-premises or co-location, how does it look like? So the study in 2017, which is not very far, last year, done by IDC, said that typical data centers are only 45% utilized. And that's measured in terms of amount of idle compute hours and unused storage capacity for provisioned components. Now, the typical TCO consideration, what we end up taking is on these 4 parameters. The 5th one I'll come a little later. the server, storage, network, and IT labor. Now, we need to make sure we do an apple-to-apple comparison. So we need hardware cost, we need the software cost, and the most importantly, we find which is most missing in most of the calculation when they try to do TCO is the facilities cost. It's important to compare all these parameters as well as on the labor cost, and there are certain extra costs depending on which industry an enterprise or an organization is operating under. Some of the commercial levers that we help customers when they're especially moving production workload is how you are able to, what is your peak utilization so that we can do right sizing. Is production workload also has a little bit of test and development environment, when you are moving to make sure that whatever runs on production is adequately tested. Can you operate that on a pay-per-use or stop and run model, as well as how you leverage some of the pricing model like reserved instances or spot instances to drive down the cost. Now, I'll have a couple of more slides before I pass it on to the next speaker. But this slide is very important to understand how we are able to, when you move production workload, typically organizations are looking at a sort of a lift and shift or a rehost methodology, which is the way they are running on premises. They exactly run it on AWS and then they start optimizing. That's a great approach because you save time and also you are not running two parallel environments for a longer period of time. But then it's important that you start doing the right sizing, elasticity, as well as the optimization on the storage immediately based on the pattern that you see, so that you can quickly reach a cost-effective optimized lift and shift. Then the real benefits which are there in the cloud comes into picture, which is like serverless, managed services, which will help you to focus more on your application or on your business rather than focusing on the infrastructure. And you can reach a replatformed AWS optimized, which is a cloud ready kind of application. Now, this doesn't stop here. Then the cycle continues from the right sizing, improved elasticity because your application would have grown. And that is how organizations are continuously innovating. And make sure that we support the customers on the production environment. We keep doing innovation on our own side. We keep releasing new and new VMs, and we equate this to a tech refresh which happens on a physical infrastructure world, which many organizations are only able to do every 5 to 6 years because they buy infrastructure for a 5-year or a 7-year period. But in AWS, you can do tech refresh every 1.5 years based on the past indicators, based on the availability of the newer infrastructure, and that is done without any additional capex. You just shift the VM which is running your production workload to a newer VM and then shut down the older VM. As simple as that. And we also keep reducing the prices down. And these are a summary of last 15 prices, which means what prices is you enter into cloud, especially AWS cloud, is not the same what you might have after 1 year. Things can go down. And this is just a summary of last 15 price reduction. We have done 66 price reduction in the last 12 years. And we continue to do more as we reach economies of scale. So summarizing the overall TCO consideration or total cost of ownership, it needs to have infrastructure cost, the application cost, migration, the people cost, and the third-party cost. So put together, you make a cost and do a business justification of moving to a production workload. And then you get into building a business case which has methodology either in terms of a directional, refined, or a detailed business case. And we help you in terms of achieving the business case by putting a comparative on-premises or a co-location and how it will look like AWS so that you can present it to your management and the same can be taken for justification. So that's all I have from my side. So over to the panelist.
Thank you so much, Krishnan. That was wonderful insights you just gave. So, so I think now moving forward, I would like to invite Mr. Pankaj Ratra and Mr. Amar Hunjan to share their experience on embracing AWS cloud for production workloads. So over to you, Pankaj and Amar.
Okay, thanks, Varun, and Thanks, Krishnan, for that insightful presentation in the context of cloud economics. And I think our friend Amar would have actually experienced this in his journey to the cloud. And at the outset, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the effort, and like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Amar Hunjan, who's the CIO for the Compass Group for Australia and New Zealand. He's a very senior technology executive who's got almost 3 decades plus of experience, and a large part of it in working with the banking and the financial services industry with companies like Citibank, Westpac, Deutsche Bank, and having started his career as a programmer to having seen some large, I would say, digital transformation initiatives that he's driving at Compass the last 4 years now. Welcome to you, Amar, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be part of this webinar.
Thanks, Pankaj, for having me here. I'm really looking forward to talk to the rest of the team.
So great, Amar. You heard what Krishnan had to say, and I'm sure you, in your journey to the cloud, you went through some of these, answering some of these questions and building eventually a business case which adds value to the overall organization initiative in that sense. And I'm sure as a part of the digital transformation initiative, the big focus that I hear you keep talking about is driving efficiency, improving user experience, and cost optimization. I'm sure they are the primary objectives of a lot of people in the audience today. However, before we really get to understanding brass track in terms of what has been your initiative, I'm sure a lot of people in this audience already know about the Compass Group, but I think it'll be good to hear from you a little bit more about the Compass Group, and more importantly, having you having the experience of worked in the banking industry, which is normally considered to be way ahead in terms of the technology and the needs, because your end of the day is serving large set of consumers. So
Yeah.
What similarities or what differentiation do you see in what Compass Group does? You want to share a quick perspective on the business and that side of it?
Yeah. So maybe Pankaj, let me maybe just cover off what Compass does first, because some people would have read of Compass on the website. But Compass is a group. Basically, its core function is in the business of food and food support services around that. It's an interesting business that was, and it's very different from banking for me as well. It was started literally as a canteen, a factory canteen, in 1941 in the UK, and has grown from then to what it is today. It's listed in the top 10 FTSE, top 10 UK listed company, and hit revenues last year of about 22.8 billion sterling, which is quite a large. So it's considered as one of the top 10 companies in UK. But it's also one that not many people know about. Right? So Compass Group is a very low-key brand out there, and that's deliberately done that way. And to give you a little bit more of a view on Compass, it's got about 500,000 employees in over 50 countries around the world. We probably serve up to 500 million meals each day. And a lot of those meals that we serve are around mainly certain types of industry sectors. So business and industry, health, seniors, education, sports and leisure, defense, remote and offshore. And I think it is very different to being in a banking environment. However, the technology layer is still got its similarities. So core ERP in a banking environment and core ERP in a food industry is still very similar. There will be some differences because obviously for a food company, supply chain is probably more important, but we still manage people, we still manage finance, we still manage all the same things that every company does. And I think that's where the commonality is. But back to Compass though. So you've probably been fed by Compass, or each person on this call at some stage in their life has probably been fed by Compass somewhere in the world, but may not have realized it. And Compass is really a business, which is a house of brands. So in those different sectors, we're branded differently, and I'll cover some of that in a second. Here in Australia, where I'm based, Compass has about 9,000 staff, spread around about 560 locations across Australia. Some very interesting places, and I'll give you some anecdotes. We'll operate on sort of city type locations, but equally we'll operate on an oil rig or a ship somewhere, where sometimes it takes us 3 days even to go and get a PC delivered in there. We need to fly a helicopter in there, or we've got some sites where it takes a camel to get in there. So we've got some real interesting challenges in terms of networks and how we deliver some of that services out there from an applications perspective. In Australia also, we've got brands that go, so we will feed you from the time you're born to probably the time you get very old, somewhere along that journey of life as well. And so when your mum's in hospital, we probably fed you through our MediRest brand. When you've gone to school, we fed you probably through our Chartwells brand. When you've gone into a company like Path, we have our business and industry group that feeds a lot of the corporate sector. And in fact, probably of the top 10 IT companies around the world, if you've ever been into Silicon Valley, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Dell, it's actually Compass feeding you at the back. Sports and leisure is another area we focus in. So again, big areas that we look at in sports and leisure. It's probably not so big in Australia, but big in other parts of the world. Wimbledon is ran by Compass. The Super Bowl is fed by Compass last year. So food is a constant in all those sectors, and obviously we get fierce competition in those areas that we deal with from a business perspective. So I think that's the background, Pankaj, of Compass. IT itself, we've got some interesting challenges because obviously we're not just serving one particular area. So in a banking sector, we may be serving just the retail bank or the corporate finance bank or the asset management or one area. But here in Compass, you're serving across all of those subsectors. And all of those subsectors then bring their own challenges in terms of cost profiles and sales profiles that we have to deal with. So an example of that is we may be serving food to a high-end bank where they want to be able to spend $20 per person per head because they want to serve a high-end meal to people, versus serving a meal to a senior living person where they only want to spend $2 for a meal. But the technology driven behind that is also very different. Even though the core technology may be the same, we may have to deal with that in different ways. So that, I think that's what, Compass has got an interesting profile to work with. And traditionally, this food industry, compared to the banking industry, where banking tends to invest a lot of money in technology and they're always at the sort of front end, I think in the food industry, it's always been slightly behind. And traditionally, it's probably been a lower invested area. And I think couple that with what Australia has been going through with the slowdown of the mining business, it then obviously drove a lot of challenges for us of how do we optimize IT from a cost perspective while we try and uplift the service and the products out there. So that's been the interesting work for me while we've been here and trying to drive some of our digital strategy.
Great. So I think that was a good update to sort of understand, and I think for a lot of us who did not know enough about Compass, I think this would have been a Great insight to know that many times and I do understand some of the challenges that you mentioned about. So, having taken this whole initiative of digital transformation, and you've been on this journey for a few years now, do you want to give us some specific initiatives that you've taken in your digital transformation journey, including embracing cloud, mobility, and things like that?
Yep. Yeah, look, I think for me, rather than calling it a digital strategy, I've always called it our technology strategy. To me, there is no differences around the two. I know a lot of the industry buzzword is around digital strategy and moving in that space, but it's never changed. It's always been a technology strategy. How does technology underpin what the business strategy is behind that? And I think when I came into Compass about 4 years ago here in Australia, we formed the strategy around sort of main themes, and there were about 5 to 6 main themes. And I'll go through them individually, probably give you a little bit more of an insight. So our first one was what we call the foundations theme. And that was really around fixing the basics in the infrastructure space. And what I mean by that is we were looking at the environment, and we had a lot of legacy here at that time. So it was removing the older legacy environment, getting rid of the older hardware, moving systems that were running unsupported, and Oracle ERP was obviously one of those that we were running unsupported, and Path were instrumental in helping us migrate the organization from our older versions to the latest versions. So the foundations was one of the key things, the key pillars we had to make sure that was sorted out first before we started building on top of it. We then had our other one, which was really called our Go Cloud. So it was go to cloud strategy. How do we go to cloud and move everything into the cloud? And moving our workloads, which were from a data center that had fixed cost and older infrastructure that was frankly inhibiting the business to move quickly, into a cloud environment. So that was the second theme we had. The third theme we had was what we call the elevate the worker. And you say to me, Amar, what does elevate the worker mean? And what we were really saying was take some of the transactional work away from individuals who were doing mundane routine work, automate it, and get those individuals to go and do better value-added pieces of work. That's what we meant by elevate the worker. And I'll give you an example of that. When I first came in here, we had a purchase order CapEx process that was running on paper at the time. And what we did was we automated that and took that away. And now today, all of our purchase orders and CapExes are running automated. Now the individual who was running that purchase order CapEx process has gone off and become a senior buyer in the organization. So doing a higher value job, which was much easier for them. The fourth item we had was what we call the information-driven strategy piece or a theme. We had lots of data in the environment, but again, not enough insight from that environment. So we drove a lot of that in as part of our strategy through here. We had over 600 Excel sheets being thrown out by various parts of the division across the organization. So we've introduced a lot of the analytics BI tools to the enterprise and started building a lot of that and really trying to glean some proper information from that data that we had and real insights out of it, which is helping the business now to serve their clients better, but also increase their revenue. So both things. And then what one of the last final ones was just making sure security stays at everybody's mind. We called it the security first mindset, because often security was forgotten until the end, and then we end up having problems. So we've tried to raise the profile of security to make sure people understand, from simple things like passwords to making sure ports are closed and things that are managed and hardened at the back end, and ran tightly is considered right at the front and not at the end. So I think, and then most importantly was also, putting some of our business sites at the center of what we do, because often the technology teams they look inward and they focus on the technology rather than focusing on what their output should be. So that, I think that's what our strategy has been around with sort of 5 or 6 themes, but go to cloud was one of the main ones we had on there.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, the audience today obviously are very keen to, I'm sure, know more about in the context of the go-to-cloud strategy, Amar. So, as much as you had these 6 definitive initiatives that you said you decided to take, from a go-to-cloud perspective, as much as I do know, and I'm sure the audience will want to know that you are already on a hosted environment, and the decision to move to a public cloud infrastructure is what you took the journey to be. So, do you want to give us a quick snapshot in terms of what were your key considerations of taking that step of moving from a hosted environment to public cloud infrastructure? And obviously, this is a journey, so you don't. It's not like you get there you take lock, stock, barrel everything onto the cloud, and you want to give some perspective on that journey as well in terms of how it has progressed and what has been your experience thus far. And what are the things typically that need to be looked out for in that sense. So there are really 2-3 parts to this question of mine. And I know it's a little elaborate one, but I would really appreciate if you could quickly sum it up in the shortest possible way.
Sure. So look, our Go Cloud theme was really coined to drive our whole strategy towards moving to the public cloud. And you rightly pointed out, we had an environment which was a hosted environment through an external provider. What we felt with that environment was that it was quite restrictive, and restrictive on a number of dimensions. Restrictive in the sense that it was a reasonably high cost environment that was put in place probably 8 years ago. And so that was one. The other one was it was also running on some fairly old legacy underlying technology, which created us some challenges in terms of production stability and when we made changes. So we did experience some fairly large outages in that old environment, which created some challenges for us. And I guess the third thing for us was that the supplier who was supporting that environment was running a very traditional support model. And I think what we found was all of those, when they combined, they frankly were inhibiting some of the business agility that we needed for us to be able to move quickly, to compete with our competitors and be able to offer things on a speed. We want to be able to spin up servers very quickly. So today we can do them in hours and even minutes, whereas before it was taking us even 6 weeks to 6 months to do some things. So we wanted that level of agility to be able to support our business. And I think some of that, we had a smaller vendor who just could not compete with the giants of the cloud world of AWS, Azure, Google, and some of the other stuff out there. So over the last year, we've actually moved our entire environment, our core infrastructure, into the cloud. We only have literally now our file server sitting internally, some local file servers, but otherwise everything else is now mainly in AWS, but also some in Azure and SaaS services, which is what I term as go cloud and be in the cloud now. So we are now moving, and we're changing terminology here now. So now our guys are being told to think about not just go to cloud, but how do you be in the cloud? So now it's be cloud, right? And when you're in the cloud, what can you do in there that makes life a little bit easier for you? So that's where we are in terms of our cloud journey today, Pankaj.
That was pretty insightful, and I can see, Amar, from what you said, I can see that you're already, from a cloud journey to be in the cloud perspective, you're already reaping the benefits of having taken this journey. So, like you mentioned, being able to do a few things that you wanted to do, which could take anything between 6 weeks to 6 months to accomplish. Now you're able to accomplish that in a matter of hours. And I'm sure that is not just value for business, but I'm sure that's a lot of benefit that or confidence that the audience here today get, that having to hear from somebody who's done it as a part of their own ecosystem and having reaped the benefit of it. I think that was pretty insightful. I think I can't think of anything more that I would like to know from you at this point in time. I would really like to thank you for taking the time out, and I would appreciate if you will stay on for another couple of minutes before we sort of do the next presentation. If audiences have any further questions that they will pop up in the meantime, then I'll really appreciate if you can stay on and be around to answer some of those queries that the audience may have. And thank you, Amar, for taking the time out today.
Thank you, Pankaj, and appreciate it.
On that note, I'll pass the control back to Varun for him to get us to the next presenter and
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pankaj and Amar. It was really a nice interaction which you had. So, now I would like to invite Vishal, who will take us through the various use cases and tell us more about the cloud. So over to you, Vishal.
Yeah, thank you, Varun. Hello, everyone. My name is Vishal Agarwal. I am the practice head for cloud and infrastructure management services at Path. I've been working on various infrastructure technologies for more than 25 years now. Now, Amar just gave us a beautiful insight on the AWS solution implemented at Compass and some of the factors that led them to adopt AWS. Now let's look at some other factors or consolidated factors which are driving organizations to implement cloud solutions on cloud. Now, traditionally, we have been implementing solutions either on premises in our own data center or maybe co-hosted at a third-party data center. Nowadays, there's a third option available, which is to implement it on cloud. Now, organizations are moving from on-premises to cloud. The considerations from change vary from financial to agility to security, growth, etc. Now, what does this mean? Now, when we implement systems on premises, in most of the cases, we need to procure the required hardware, software, and other equipment. This requires a upfront investment or capital expense. Also, in case it's a new hardware required, like Amar shared that earlier, to spin up a new server, they used to take anywhere between 6 weeks to maybe a couple of months, because you need time to procure this hardware and software. But what if you need these systems up and running in next few days or maybe next couple of days? Because businesses today are very agile. They need to launch new products and services in days instead of weeks or months that earlier it used to take. And if the IT cannot support these requirements, then the overall business suffers. What about the sizing of these systems? The growth, the business growth. Now, normally, when you take it on premises, we size the system as per what it is going to be or what the business growth is expected for, let's say, next few years. If not 4 or 5 years, at least next 3 years. So what we end up in investing in hardware and maybe software that we may not even utilize for next few years. Now, cloud infrastructure provides you a solution for these problems. We can provision systems in minutes or hours instead of weeks. The scale up and scale down capabilities or the elastic cloud allows us to cater to the peak or seasonal loads as well as expected or unexpected business growth. We can grow as the business grows. The IT systems grows as the business grows. Plus, pay-as-you-go model allows you to control even your OpEx as per your changing requirements. Even let's say, take an example of a test system, which might only be used during the day. You can have a option of switching it off during the night and reduce your billing. Now, data security is another requirement in all the organizations, and a lot of government regulations are coming in which are making organizations responsible for ensuring data security. Now, the requirement, these are, which basically means that organizations needs to meet a number of industry or country specific requirements or the standards. The cloud infrastructure, all the cloud, the AWS data centers are certified and compliant with multiple security standards, and they meet all country specific as well as industry specific standards and statutory requirements, which saves time and money for the organizations. So what it basically means in a nutshell is when you move to cloud, you also hand over some of your major worries to the cloud service provider. Now, till now, all of us in this webinar have talked about the benefits of moving to the cloud. But how do I take my first steps to migrate my workloads to the clouds? So what we believe is it's a 4-step journey to the cloud. Assess, design, migrate, and maintain. Now, out of these 4, the first, which is assess, in our opinion and in our experience of movement to cloud, this is the most important step out of these 4. And this is where we need to spend most time to ensure that we assess what can move. Here we need to look at things like prioritizing, grouping of the applications, how the integrations are going to work, whether I'm going to go for a big bang approach, which means I move everything to the cloud, which is very rare, or I go by a piecemeal approach where I move few applications and few remains on my on-premises. So all these decisions, assessments, and what can move, what cannot move, what are the gaps, like Krishnan shared that when GE did this designing, they were actually able to figure out that there are 50 odd applications which they don't even need. So those are the things that needs to be discussed and discovered during this assessment. Once you have assessed what needs to be moved, then comes my design phase, where I design my cloud infrastructure, how the cloud infrastructure will look like, how these applications are going to run, how the users are going to access these applications, how my integrations with other applications, because I said initially it's very rare that you move everything to the cloud. You will be moving some part of the application to the cloud, other applications may still remain on premises. So it's a hybrid kind of a situation which needs to talk to each other. So how the integrations are going to work, how my user authentications are going to work. All this comes during the design phase, where I design and come out with an architectural blueprint to say this is how it will look like on my cloud. And then comes the actual step of migrating to the cloud. If you have done your homework right, if you have done your assessment and design phase right, then migration becomes much more easier. Once the migration is done, then like any other system, whether you are having it on your own DC or you are having it in a third-party DC or on cloud, you need to maintain it. The BAU support or the lights on support. That is where you need to keep on working. And being on the cloud, one big advantage that you get is the elastic cloud, which is scale up and scale down. Depending on your requirements, depending on the seasonality, depending on the peak periods, you can either scale up or scale down your systems on the fly. Now, I will like to move on to few use cases or the few case studies that I have that we have done, some of the customers who have embraced the cloud. We will want to talk about that now. The first case study is actually for Compass Group itself, which is what Amar discussed, which is where the Compass Group ANZ is a user of Oracle EBS. We have moved them. I think I will not spend much time on this because Amar has already shared a lot of insight on this. So it is basically, it was in a co-hosted environment. Like Amar shared, scaling up, scaling down was a problem. What we have done is we have moved this entire setup to the AWS cloud. The entire setup means the production, dev, test, everything has been moved to AWS cloud. It enables Compass to work on a much better, it gives elastic computing, all those things. That cost has got optimized. There's agility. In case new dev or test systems are required, they can be spin off in hours instead of days that it used to take earlier. And obviously the cost has come down. I'm not talking much about this because this is something which Amar has already discussed. The second case study here is DR on cloud, disaster recovery on cloud. This is a very, creating DR on cloud is almost a no-brainer. One of the major reasons that when we discuss with the organizations, one of the major reasons that they say why they are not moving, why they are not creating a DR is the investments that it requires. Like you need to create a replica hardware of your production at the DR site, and that replica hardware will be used only when there is a disaster. So it's a kind of an idle investment. Cloud saves that investment. You don't need to procure any hardware. The hardware is given to you on a pay-per-use basis. So your capex requirement really goes down. So this is for one of the largest transportation and logistic company in India. And they had several .NET and Oracle applications running on it, running with Oracle database. They did not have any DR. And this is where and one of the reasons was that high capex required for creating the DR. Now we have created a DR on cloud with scale up, scale down facilities and everything. It has reduced the expected TCO. There's a good RTO RPO. It's a RTO RPO of less than half an hour, which is there. Recently, the customer did a DR drill about 20 days back. They did a DR drill, and they were so happy with that DR drill that they actually made a comment saying that the end user could not find any difference between whether he's working on the on-premises production system or the cloud DR system. So that kind of a facility it can create with a very reduced capex. Okay. So this is the last case study that I will want to talk about. This is this is for a lending organization in India. They have now migrated their lending application to AWS cloud. Again, the reasons are similar, that during the festive season they have a huge peak which the on-prem system was not able to take care of. So they have decided to go with AWS cloud, which gives them the agility to scale up or scale down as and when required. So this is another one case study for production workload movement to AWS. With that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I'll hand it over to Varun to talk about, to take up the Q&A and any other options that he wants to talk about. Varun, hand over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vishal. Thanks for your insights. And now I will move on to the the special offer which we are providing as of now. So we are excited to offer our attendees. I mean, in order to quick start their journey to cloud, we are offering $1,000 service credits, wherein they can use it for the guidance and workshops in order to start their journey to cloud. So I think and further details, if someone has any questions related to this, we can connect post this webinar, and we will be glad to assist you for further questions related to this. Next slide, please. Now, post this webinar, we also have a brief survey on cloud readiness. So a survey will pop out on your screen once you will end this webinar. And I would request all of you to spend few seconds and submit your response so that we can share your readiness report with you individually. And we will also share the trends. So I think it will be an important piece of information for you to understand and use. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to the questions, I think we are very, we have very limited time, so I'll not take more questions. I think we have got 2 questions, so very quickly I will ask them. So the first question is, what are the aspects of GDPR when we choose the data location for cloud tenancy? So over to you, panelists and speakers. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Varun, this is Vishal here. I think it's so from I will like to get some more details when the participant is asking about GDPR. What does he exactly wants to know? If he's talking about the data securities and the data residency, then it depends on which data center that you are co-locating, because depending on your data residency requirements, you can choose one of the data centers which are in the country. AWS has multiple data centers in multiple countries, like in India, they have a data center. In Australia, they have a data center. So you can actually, when you subscribe to AWS, you can choose which data center you want your data to reside. If it is anything else, I'd like the participant to further clarify what he meant.
Sure. I think we can connect post this webinar to get a more specific question.
And I think
just very quick.
We are already, Varun, I think we are already running out of time. So maybe what we can do is, any more questions which have come, we can connect post webinar and answer those questions. We can consolidate those queries and share the answers with the participants.
Sure, that sounds great. Sure. So I think with that, we end this webinar. So once again, thank you so much to all of you for spending your precious time for attending this, and I hope this was a useful session for you, and it will help you to initiate your journey to cloud. As I was speaking in my earlier slide, that post this webinar, you all will get a survey. So it would be great if you could spend some time filling out that survey so that we can get back to you with a customized report based on your responses. If you have any further questions, or if you want to connect with any panelists, we would be glad to do that. My email ID is varun.rawat@pathinfotech.com. So any questions would be, we'll be more than welcome to assist you in all kind of questions. So once again, and thanks for joining. You all have a great day.